I'm not sure if this is going to surprise you or not, but Alaska actually has been suffering a net migration loss for the past couple of years, which means that we have more people leaving the state than coming into the state. And this is not historically something that's a huge surprise. And the people who talk about their reasons for leaving Alaska, they're more or less fall into a number of the categories we're going to be talking about today. So at least you kind of have your eyes wide open as you're looking at moving up here. Before we get started, though, do make sure you give this video a like, subscribe, and do all that good stuff. And if I haven't said so already, my name is Jamin Goecker. I'm an associate real estate broker in the state of Alaska. My mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family. Now, let's go ahead and talk about why people decide to leave Alaska. One of the big reasons that people decide to leave Alaska is just because of the lack of career opportunities. If you are someone in the medical field or you're someone who is working with more of the trades, something where you're going to be working with your hands, then there's a very good opportunity that you're not going to have any struggle at all with finding work. But if you're kind of middle management, corporate America, there may or may not be a whole lot of career advancement opportunities for you up here. And so for that reason, a lot of people will come up here when they're young, start their families, and then they get to a certain point in their career where they just can't really move up anymore. And they have to make that decision. Are we going to stay here at the sacrifice of our careers, or are we going to move somewhere else and advance the career and then maybe come back to retire later? And as we can see in the stats, a lot of people decide we have to do for our careers. And we loved Alaska, loved our time here, and we might come back later. But this is just a reality for the moment. Now, this next one is really not going to be a surprise for most people, and that is just the fact that the winters up here are cold and they last seemingly forever. And when I say seemingly forever, usually they last about 6 months. And you have about a month or so of transition really on either side of that. So you do get a fall and you do get a springtime. And believe me, when summertime gets here, you absolutely milk it for all it's worth. But the winter times are tough for a lot of people, and it's not just the cold, which it's not as cold as what you would think by looking at headlines and looking at a bunch of clickbait that you'll see on YouTube talking about Alaska. Oh, it's -70, and make it sound like that's the norm. That's not the norm. Where most people actually live in Alaska, in South Central, the coldest I've seen it get in recent years has been about -20. And will it get colder? I'm sure it will at some point. But for right now, like -20 is really about the coldest that it gets. And that's still pretty chilly, but there are parts of the country that regularly gets colder than that. And really what sets Alaska apart, though, is the darkness. And again, it's not as extreme as what you would think by looking at the headlines or looking at a bunch of clickbait you find on YouTube where they talk about Barrow, Alaska, or Nome, where it's just lights out for a couple months at a time, but it still is pretty dark here. And during the winter time, some winter solstice, I think we'll get about 6 hours or so of sunlight during the darkest time of the year, which that's still something. It's not nothing, and that makes a big difference. But for people who really need sunlight, who get the seasonal effectiveness disorder, where they don't, they start getting some psychological and physiological responses to not getting a lot of exposure to the sun, that is something that you need to be aware of. And unfortunately, you just don't know who you are until you actually get up here and start experiencing the darkness for yourself. I actually do deal with the seasonal effectiveness disorder myself, or SAD, and it's something where you just kind of wake up one day and you're kind of depressed. And that's about the most heads up that you get. So the best thing I can say for people who are, think they might be inclined towards that is just make sure you start taking those vitamin D supplements, and also make sure you're kind of pushing into community and not allowing yourself to self-isolate, because that's really where things start deteriorating fairly quickly. Now, I do not have any children or students myself, so I can't really speak to this one directly, but a lot of people who left, one of the reasons they gave for deciding to leave was just not liking the schooling options that were available. Again, this is something where it probably wasn't the single reason that made everyone decide to leave, but it was probably one of those things that kind of contributed to the decision to leave. And I'm sure it really does come down to which specific school district it is that you're in and what age your student is, for that matter. Another reason that people do decide to leave the state is going to be the law enforcement. Crime, law enforcement, and the homelessness issue. Now, I have to kind of tread a little bit lightly here. I can't tell you specifically where these places are because that is actually a federal violation against fair housing. And I'll explain why that is in a minute. But anytime we're looking at the crime statistics in Alaska, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit because I know that if we took out certain very, very specific parts of the state and very specific towns, you will notice that there is going to be a dramatic shift in the statistics for Alaska. And yeah, I mean, once you actually live here, you do know that certain parts of the state do the heavy lifting for most of the crime stats. And if those were removed, it would be completely different. And so the big takeaway is avoid certain areas, and usually you're going to be okay. Obviously, there's crime everywhere, but not nearly as much as you would think by looking at all the headlines. Now, the reason that I have to tread carefully and not say specific areas is because I, as a real estate professional, am not allowed to say for you what areas are going to be safe or unsafe or where you'd be happy or where you wouldn't be happy. I am not allowed to steer you into or away from any areas. So the best thing I am legally allowed to do is to point you towards the crime maps and tell you to, do your research and make your decision for yourself on what you believe is going to be best for you and your family. I will say, though, do make sure you check out those crime maps and then you go check out the crime maps for where you currently live, just to kind of give you a baseline. I really do feel this next one, and that is that when you're in Alaska, you don't have the ability to just drive to other states. Alaska has got countries as our neighbors, and it is a large state to begin with. So road trips are very difficult to do. And if you're someone who really enjoys going on those long summer road trips where you're just driving across the country and seeing, 10, 20 states or something like that, Alaska is probably not going to be the ticket for you. But at least in that department, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get out and see other states once you're up here, because it does take quite a bit of an effort to get here and then get out of Alaska if you want to go visit something. Let's go ahead and take a break real quick. For those who've been watching for a little bit, you do know that I host a podcast called The Alaskan Journey, where I interview people who've recently moved up here to Alaska about their experience of getting here and what they think about the state so far. So this is a great opportunity for you to hear from other people who aren't just me, to actually talk about the state and kind of discuss what it is that they think about it, the pros, the cons, the good, the ugly, and everything in between. So that's going to be a great thing for you to go check out. Link for that is going to be in the description section down below. And also, if you are considering moving to Alaska, do make sure you go check out my relocation guide. Link for that is going to be to my website. And then when you register to the website, just put relocation guide in the comments section so I know what to send you. Don't just go to the comments section on the YouTube video and say relocation guide. How am I supposed to send you anything when you do that? Go to the website, register, and put relocation guide so I can actually send you something. Now, let's go and finish up today's video. Now, for the college age people, they may or may not decide to go to school in Alaska, and that's because there's just not a whole lot of higher education right at the moment that's available up here. You get UAA and some other University of Alaska schools that are available, and they have great programs for very specific niche things. But if you're looking for programs that are very specific, then Alaska may or may not be the ticket for you. And for that reason, we do see a lot of younger people just opting not to go to school in Alaska just for that reason. I'm not sure how many people use this as their primary gauge as to whether or not they're going to stay in the state or not, but some people, some of the reasons that they would leave is just the dating scene, if they're single, is not particularly great. Especially if you're a guy, the male to female ratio up here is the most dramatic shift towards there being more men than women than there are in any other states in the entire union. And once you start actually breaking it down a little bit and say, okay, well, of all the men and women, how many of them are single? How many of them are married? And once you start looking at the single men versus the single women, it probably gets even more dramatic once we start looking at that. There's a joke that goes around with women where they say, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. And for men, it's kind of both. The odds aren't good and the goods are odd at the same time. So that's another reason that some people might decide to move out of the state, is just the dating opportunities might be better in other areas. So If you're looking at moving to Alaska and you're single, maybe try to bring someone with you is all I'm saying. Now, I've made videos on this next topic, so if that's something that you're interested in, do make sure you go check out the channel for more videos on this topic. But one of the reasons that people list for moving somewhere else is just the cost of living in Alaska is pretty high. And it's not nearly as high as what you would find in some of the big metropolitans and where most people live in the lower 48, but it is going to be pretty expensive. It does blow my mind when I go to the lower 48 and I see the cost of, prices when you're eating out or going to the grocery store. And that's really where Alaska is going to start getting expensive, because it does cost a lot of money and resources for transporting any kind of food stuff up to Alaska. And that is where it gets so expensive, along with the utilities and everything else. So the cost of living, it's not something that has to be really prohibitive, but for some people it is a contributing factor as to why they decide to eventually leave. This is going to be another one of those things where it's like, I don't think this by itself is going to make people decide that they want to leave, but it can be a little difficult up here building relationships with people, because a lot of the old timers are just, they've seen a lot of people come and go in their time living here, and they just kind of want to wait and see if someone is actually going to stick around. Meanwhile, that person is just struggling to find friends and connect with people. And so it kind of speeds up their desire to just, go back to where they already have a network already established. And so, again, not one of those things by itself, I believe, for most people, but it definitely would be a contributing factor. So this has been your list talking about the major reasons people decide to leave Alaska. And of course, there are going to be a lot of different reasons, just kind of depending on the personal motivations for everybody. But these are going to be the big ones. And I'll also say that a lot of people do eventually move back to Alaska after having, moved somewhere else. And that is because the pros of living in Alaska, the lifestyle, the absolute beauty and everything else that goes along with it, really do outweigh the cons. But those cons still exist, though. And so for most people, it's something that they eventually just have to come to grip with one way or the other. And they have to decide, okay, well, for this season of our lives, we're just not going to be able to be in Alaska. So we're going to go build the career somewhere else, and then we'll be able to come back as soon as we possibly can. And we definitely will. But for now, we just can't afford to take the sacrifice for the career that would be required for us to continue living here. And so that is one of the big reasons that a lot of people decide to leave, but eventually they do end up coming back. So this has been the video today talking about the reasons people decide to leave Alaska. I hope it was useful for you. If you have any other questions, do reach out to me. Be more than happy to talk. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.